Hey up lads and lasses, Damphyre here, back again with some more Infinite Lagrange. As per usual, in the next few videos we are looking at updating the tier list and making sure that all the ships that got added are in and stuff like that. I'm moving some stuff around. I'm doing this base from scratch and I've updated all the pictures so you can see what they are on screen, hopefully a lot better. And yeah, so without further ado, let's jump into it. So here we go, we are in the tier maker, and as you can see, I've got these all rather nicely set up so you can see what they are. So we'll start off with the AC721, this is the generic, this is the base variant, that is going into situational. Its use depends on which server you're in a little bit. So because it can be upgraded considerably to increase the amount of cargo it carries, it's very, very good and almost a requirement early game to be putting these into your fleet for your miners. This increases the overall rate of your mining as they're not traveling as much, so it's actually very, very, very useful and I do recommend building them. On phase 2, that's the node recovery, it's not so useful. However, on phase 3 and phase 4 where you're running Trojite, can be extremely useful there as well. The mining times on Trojite are very long, so the longer you can have something mining, the better, and the more you're bringing back. Again, it's also useful for the delivery of Trojite, having I actually had a load of AC721s built up in my phase 3 server, literally just for delivery runs. It was called the White Man Van fleet. So yeah, it did the job pretty well. Again, also useful in data recovery, similar reasons. You've got data collection where it can be used there within the fleet that's collecting the data and delivering to the Lagrange gate or to the base. So AC721, situational, but really it's like an S tier. It's useless in combat, keep it out of combat. Just want to point that out. The AC721 aircraft. Now, this is one of only 2 destroyers that can carry corvettes. It is the worst of the 2, in my opinion, but it's still pretty good. If you don't have the Guardian dual purpose, it is your best bet. So it goes into B. It's probably more like an A, but I'll keep it in B because it is average in overall of the carrying capabilities. But it's, you know, I've seen plenty of people. I've used it personally for carrying corvettes in when I had really good corvettes but crap ships, and it did the job extremely well of bringing in very high damaging corvettes in, so it saved my life on more than one occasion. We then have the AC721 missile. I'm going to put in D tier. It is an indirect fire weapon, but its DPM is severely lacking, unfortunately, and I therefore don't rate it particularly high. We then have the generic Aldebra, or Aldebra, however that's meant to be said. The generic is the base variant. It has the highest DPM of the 2 variants and a very, very healthy amount of armor in comparison to other destroyers, up to the point where upgraded it's on the baseline of a cruiser. Makes it very, very, very good actually. The cannons itself are actually good DPM as well, with basically the same ones as the Chimera, but obviously fewer of them. So yeah, I do quite rate the Aldebra. It is a little bit awkward to run. It's quite fragile even with its high armor. It's due to the fact that its energy armor, energy resistance are non-existent, so energy fleets do rip them apart. But its DPM and in the right fleet composition, things like your Carillion specials will tank for it quite well, and if they are tanking, it'll pop a ton of damage. The Aldebra Armored is worse. I'm actually going to put that in C tier. The reason for that, yes, it has more armor, but it loses its DPM, and great, it's got more armor. Its energy resistances still suck. So it's still going to drop just as fast as the generic, and at the same time, it's not going to output the DPM. So yeah, there is some sort of defense in offense there, and where the armored is defense with more defense, it just doesn't work quite so well. Ceres, the aircraft cruiser. is B tier, rather unfortunately. It's similar situation to the AC-721 aircraft. It is great. It's got, fighter carrying capabilities. However, the healing that it has is basically useless. Yes, it can heal a little bit. Most of the time, your fighters and stuff will die before they get healed, and that makes it completely redundant. Its mods and stuff aren't particularly great. They are mostly RTB and stuff like that. So it's not too bad in that sort of situation. And if it is the only aircraft carrier that you've got within the destroyers, then it's perfectly usable. You do find a lot of people will use it, actually. We have the series support. It's S tier. Now, the reason for this is quite simply, it's the only ship, bar the Spear, which I'm not counting as a healing ship because it's a Spear, that has 2 UAVs for healing that you can actually get a blueprint for anyway. So, it's an S tier. It's got the most healing potential of all of the ships within the game. So yeah, it's definitely S tier in my opinion, like I did in the frigate one. It's joint with the Noma, and Noma being cheaper, lower CP cost, Ceres being higher CP cost, but you are getting increased healing with that. The Ceres Tactical loses its UAV capabilities to gain, loses aircraft carrying capabilities to grab some UAVs that really, they're semi-useful, but within the destroyer frigate fleet you're running, generally not particularly great. They do synergize somewhat with the heavy cannon Eris, but other than that, they don't really do much else. The Eris cannon, this is the base variant. I'm going to also put into B. It's not bad. It's, a perfectly decent ship. Its DPM is relatively good. But it is somewhat lacking in comparison to some of the other ships that we'll see later on. The armored variant is going to C tier as well. It just loses too much. So the Eris has a pretty solid dodge tank as is. In the Eris, it loses some of that dodge tank, and losing of that just to gain a tiny bit more armor is just absolutely not worth it. And on top of that, it does lose DPM again. So in my opinion, I don't actually rate the Eris armored. I'd rather run the standard cannon. We then have the heavy cannon. I am still keeping it in B tier. The reason for it is it can't hit a barn door from inside the barn. It's got this amazing potential DPM, but it just can't hit to save its life. I've tried it with spotter UAVs. I've tried it, upgrading, maxing out all of its aim ability and targeting abilities in the mods on it, and yeah, it just still somewhat lacks. It's a little bit awkward, really. It can output, and it does output more than the base cannon version, just because the cannons itself do hit enough to keep up with it, but for the most part, it will miss everything. We have the Guardian support. I will probably put this in B tier at the lower end. Again, you've already got the Ceres in here at S rank, and the Guardian support has 1 UAV. Yes, it has anti-aircraft UAVs there as well. They don't seem to do enough to really provide that aircraft support that you need. And it's healing out only 1, especially for the CP cost, makes it worse than a Noma in the case of healing, and worse than a Ceres for certain, which is twice the healing capability of the Guardian. The Guardian dual purpose. Do I put this in A or S? If it's specifically destroyer ranking, I guess it's S. So the dual purpose is your other corvette carrier. It can have triple damage mods on itself, buffing your corvettes to 30% damage just from being on top of the ship. It is by far the most efficient damage buffing ship for corvettes, I believe, within the game. I don't even think the Solar Whale can buff as high as this can. So It's actually really damn good, and in frigate fleets, and I do run these in my cruiser fleets from occasion, where instead of running, say, Jaegers and stuff like that, I run the Guardians for increased damage and a smaller amount of corvettes, and it does that absolutely incredibly well, and it is very, very good at it. We then have the Guardian Pulse Cannon. That's going above the heavy cannon Eris. The Pulse Cannon version of the Guardian is pretty damn good. It's got similar DPM to the Taurus. It's not quite the same, but it hasn't got the survivability of the Taurus. So it's going to go into B tier. It's pretty average, but it does the job. And to be honest, other than the Taurus, it's probably one of the better DPM ships. The Kwawa Railgun variant is basically a heavy cannon Eris. There's not really much for me to talk about here. It's got similar upgrade paths, it has similar DPM, it has the abysmal hit rate of the Eris heavy cannon. So yeah, it's going into B tier. The core torps though are S tier. It is basically a baby Callisto. Its torps have absolutely absurd amounts of capability to just demolish everything. It has really good DPM. The row it's on is really good as well. It sits at the back, so it's like nicely away from things, doesn't get targeted much, allowing its torps to just rain fury down on your enemies, and it does it pretty damn well. It's probably it might actually be the highest DPM ship within the destroyer class. We then have the Taurus Offensive. I'm going to put that in A tier. I don't believe its DPM is as good as the core torps when maxed, but it is actually very good. It's definitely better than generic Aldebra, actually, come to think of it. Switch those. Yeah, there we go. Switch those around a bit. So, Taurus Offensive. Energy-based weapons, loads of damage, primary target frigate destroyer, which have no energy, and it will absolutely shred them. This is one of the few ships that, when maxed, can actually deal with the Carillion spam relatively well, considering the Carillions just dodge everything. It does an okay job with it. We then have the Assault variant. I'm actually going to put that behind the Offensive variant, and this is mostly due to the fact that Carillion spam's pretty apparent in later servers for certain, and the Assault variant can't shoot them to save its life. It is fantastic at taking down spears and ST-59s, battle cruisers that are on the front row, but if there's any sort of Carillion, which most fleets are running nowadays, it just struggles in comparison to the Offensive for not much extra DPM, in my opinion, either. We then have the Taurus Defensive. I'm going to put that there in B tier. Now, the reason I'm putting it in B tier is because it loses DPM. It also loses dodge rate, which generally makes it worse on the defensive than the other two variants, which have increased dodge rate because of it having heavy armor and barely any extra real heavy armor. It just doesn't do what it says on the box in comparison to the Assault or the Offensive in terms of tanking damage. So, unfortunately, it is going to go into B tier. We then have the Tundra aircraft, which I'm going to put into S tier. These are all sort of on par because they are different things. They're doing different things a little bit. But the Tundra aircraft is the best carrier in the destroyers for fighters. The reason for this is it's got a passive increase to the hit rate of fighters, which means things that you do want to put in this, spores, sandrakes, mistrals, will increase the damage output of them substantially over the base series, and you don't have to worry about healing anyway on fighters. So it does its job extremely well. It's also got some of the time to lock on upgrades as well, which does make it pretty damn good there. Tundra support going next to the Guardian support for the same reason as the Guardian. In my opinion, I prefer the Guardian. It's got slightly better DPM against frigates and cruisers versus the Tundra, but the Tundra does have slightly better AA capabilities, although the AA capabilities are relatively bad in the first place, so it doesn't really, that doesn't help all that much. We then have the Winged Hussar anti-ship. It's going above the Eris Heavy Cannon and the Kwawa Railgun. These things maxed out consistently deal more damage than the Heavy Cannon Eris and the Railgun in actual use. Yeah, its DPM doesn't say it's as much, but unfortunately, because of the inability for the Eris or the Kwawa to actually attack and hit things, it genuinely does seem to out DPM most ships, most of these other ships here. We have the AA variant, which I'm going to put into C tier. Yeah, it will go there. It's too variable in how often it works. Sometimes it will absolutely and utterly massacre enemy aircraft. Other times it does absolutely nothing. Unfortunately, the more I use it and the more I tried it and tested it, it was on the latter. It was more likely to do nothing than it was to do anything else. So unfortunately, it is going into C tier. Now, what do I do with the integrated? So the integrated is going to the top of C tier, I believe. So it loses the railgun and it gains, I believe it's torps or missiles, and it grants it indirect fire, which is quite nice. It allows it to ignore front lines, especially if the Carillions, and hit things in the mid and rear rows. However, it doesn't do it anywhere near as good as the Kwawa torps, and you kind of have to compare both of them being both destroyers, both missile and direct fire capability. So I think that's looking about right. There's a lot in B section, not so much in D section, but generally most of the destroyers are very good, and even, you know, putting Tauruses in A tier doesn't feel quite right with me, but to spread things out a little bit, sort of what I decided to do. Pretty much any of the S and A tiers and the top end of B, if you don't have some of the S or A tiers, will see you through to end game levels of damage. These things can, they easily pump out absolutely tons of damage for the CP cost of them, and running full frigate destroyer fleets can literally hold you right the way through to the end of server. I personally run fast response fleets of frigates, destroyers, and some of these ships are definitely win there. The Kwawa torps is in within my fleets constantly. Currently not running Tauruses because my fleet's mostly centered around frigates. So yeah, no Tauruses in there, and I think the only destroyer I am running in there at the moment is the Kwawa. I think the rest are all frigates. So very good damage, especially for the CP cost. Most of these destroyers in general are very good for the CP cost over all of them provide substantial DPM to your fleets, or that word that I can't pronounce, substantial support to your fleets via carriers and stuff like that, or healing in the case of the series support, the Guardians and the Tundras. And yeah, they're just very, very efficient. They're cheap to build. If you lose an entire fleet of frigate destroyers, you don't care. You could probably rebuild it within a day. And there you go, you're sorted. So, overall, there we go. That's my recommendations and my tier list for this. Of course, if you have anything that you'd rather you think differently, do leave it in the comments. I do try and reply to as many comments as I possibly can. Other than that, have a good one, guys, and I'll catch you next time.